Recording.
Woohoo! Welcome, Joyce. Welcome, Micah. I know it's really odd because you can't chime in, and I'll announce this again as we start in a couple minutes, but we're going to make use of the chat during this presentation. So if you find over on the right-hand side of your window, you'll see chat, not the Q&A, but the chat. And that's where we're gonna, there we go, there it is, Micah and Ezra. We see your hi. So that's how we're going to communicate with one another. If you have a question during the presentation, feel free to pop that into the chat. So hang on there for just a few more minutes and we'll get started probably at 10:01. I'm guessing some folks are probably figuring out how to sign in and get their computer set up right now. All right, so I'm going to stop my video for a second, but you can still hear my voice. And that is because I'm pulling up my presentation in the back. So my name is Jen Brumfield. That's who's yapping at you. And Kate McNeese, naturalist Kate McNeese.
Hi.
On the other end there. And Kate is going to be helping today as the host, making sure that we see everybody's questions in the chat. So I'm just double checking that my presentation is in the background, and it is. Okay, I am back. This morning was amazing up on the lakefront. If you have the opportunity to get out, a ton of newly arrived migrant birds came in last night. And oh, there's Min. Welcome, Min. So we have Joyce and Micah and Ezra and Min. So a ton of birds came in last night because we had strong southwest winds and very warm temperatures. Some of these birds flew all the way from Central America, Mexico. Welcome, Billy. So a ton of new birds arrived. Baltimore orioles, blue-headed vireos, warbling vireos, Swainson's thrushes, hermit thrushes, gray-cheek thrushes. Oh, what else did we have there today? Palm warblers, yellow rump warblers, Nashville warblers, pine warblers. It's so exciting. Welcome, Alex. I'm yapping about birds because there's an incredible arrival last night of migrant birds. Let me do a sound check real quick. My sound is all the way up. So if you could, just welcome, Anne. If you could find the chat in the screen here, so you can pop up the chat. We're not going to use the Q&A. We're going to use the chat, and that is where naturalist Kate McNeese is going to, there she is going to scan for any questions you might have today. Feel free to pop a note into the chat right now if you want to get familiar with it. So I'm going to send one to the chat that just says, welcome, everyone. And see if that pops up on your screen. All right. Well, you know what? I am going to go ahead and get started. Oh, there's Mike Hardy. Welcome, Mike. I'm going to go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do is we're going to switch over. Kate, if you could mute yourself for now. Okay, sweet. Yep, I see you. Kate's going to mute herself for now, but Kate's going to be watching the chat to see if you have any questions, which is so awesome of her. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my video and share my screen. And what you're going to see now is the presentation. Now, again, Kate, please feel free at any moment in time to pop in and say, JB, we've got a question today. I'm going to go ahead and click on present. So you should have a full screen. Kate, can you give me a thumbs up if you see a full screen? All right. So talking about forests is one of my favorite topics. Our forests, you know, people love, oh, let's walk in the woods, and the woods are so beautiful. And absolutely, yes, they are. And there's a reason why. Encouraging people to get outside and into the woods because it's such a healthy environment. Everything from wildflowers to birds to the mammals that live in forests. And they're some of our most diverse habitats. When we think of some of the biggest, most incredible forests, we think of the cloud forests and the rainforests down in the Amazon. We think about the deep forests in the Congo. And it truly is absolutely truth that forests are the lungs of the planet. As trees breathe, that says breath. As trees breathe, they take in carbon while emitting the oxygen for animals to inhale. So they're taking in this carbon and using that as sugar to grow while emitting the oxygen that we all breathe in, that every single animal around us breathes in. In total, our forests cover approximately 1/3 of the planet, thank goodness. Individually, different types of forests create their own zones around the globe with very unique plants and very unique animals found only within their confines. So if you think about going to Vietnam and looking through the forests of Vietnam and how remarkable the bird life is there, how remarkable the plant life is there. And it's so different than going to Botswana. It's so different than going to Brazil. It's so different than going to Peru or Venezuela. It's so different even than going to New Zealand. So let's take a look at a really big picture. I love this image of our forests around the world. So obviously highlighted in the dark green are all of the forest system types that we have around the world. Everything from evergreen and deciduous trees. So our deciduous trees would be our maple trees and our beech trees. Our evergreens would be our conifers, our pine trees and our spruce trees. So many different types of forest systems all around the world. And you can see that there's some major areas in the world where those forest systems are incredibly dense. Obviously, South America, in through Central Africa, and in through the Malaysian Islands, Papua New Guinea. And then our northern boreal forests, our northern forests through Russia, up above China, through Canada and into Alaska. So our forest systems indeed cover 1/3 of our globe. Now let's take a look at Ohio. Ohio used to be covered from the eastern border to the northern border to the western to the southern border in solid forest. Now our world has changed much since European settlers came through. Native Americans would clear small portions of land, but it wasn't until the European settlers came through that large-scale land clearing became a thing. And then, of course, into the industrialization of Ohio. So clearing for resources, clearing for building, for trains. Our forests took a major hit. Now, fortunately, within Ohio, we have over 8 million acres of tree cover. 96% of Ohio's forests are hardwood with over 100 species of trees across the state. So over 30% of Ohio is still forested. Now you may or may not have been into the southern Ohio forests, Shawnee State Forest, Hocking Hills region, and you can understand why those areas are even more forested as they are quite hilly. So that's where you start getting down into the Appalachian foothills. That's where you see those large rocky outcroppings. Everybody feels, oh, I'm in the deep forest now. I'm starting to get into the hills, into the Appalachian foothills, into these rich, thick beech, maple, and pine and spruce forests. So that's a look at Ohio as we know it today. Now, what's amazing is if you look up by the words northeastern unit, you know, we have some pretty dense forests in our 23,000 acres in Cleveland Metro Parks. But on this map, it actually does not look heavily forested at all. So that shows you the comparison of just how we do have quite a few forests here, but look how densely forested it is in southern Ohio. So in Cleveland Metro Parks, 23,000 acres. Now that's not all forests. That includes our fields and our wetlands, our marshes and our swamps. What's incredible is we have a lot of forest diversity here in Cleveland Metro Parks, everything from hemlock woods, beech maple, hickory forests, stands of red maple. So our forest systems are definitely worth checking out. I hope you have all been in them. Kate, anybody commenting if they've been in our forest? Oh, throw up a comment. Yeah, throw up a comment, everybody. Our forests, we live in the temperate region, and our forests get nowhere near as large and tall, our trees nowhere near as large and tall as those in the Amazon. But of course, in some of our healthier forests, which you'll note down in Brecksville Reservation, note in North Chagrin Reservation and South Chagrin Reservation, those are some of our healthiest forests. We do have some very large trees that start to approach the 100-foot mark. These are rather incredible trees indeed. Mostly large oaks, some tulip trees pushing through. Here we have a lot of dense maple trees all around us. So as we go through our forests and those city parks even, a lot of the trees around us are maple trees. This is a look at what summer looks like here on a path through the forest. And of course, during the fall, we get our amazing colors here because we have, oh, I see some comments. Kate, what's everybody saying? Unmute yourself.
I'm trying. We've got Mike and Ezra have 47 acres of forest. Super lucky.
What?
And Billy said that they went to the Mohican Valley tree houses. That sounds amazing.
I'm jealous. I want to go to those tree houses. That must have been an incredible experience. Well,
Billy had a question.
I just saw that one pop up. What did Ohio look like 5 or 10 years ago? You know what? Very similar as it does today. However, different groups have been working very, very, very hard to reforest Ohio, even in our suburbs, because something huge that's being pushed now is that forests are carbon sinks. Now, this might be a little bit tricky to understand, so we're going to go so. What in the world is a forest carbon sink? Well, all of the chemicals and all of the oxygen that we breathe out then as carbon dioxide, all of that goes up into the atmosphere. All of that carbon, which we can't have too much of. If we have too much carbon, it's a very unhealthy environment. But all that carbon is then grabbed by and absorbed by our trees. They store it to use it for food, which is remarkable, and then release some of it, but not a whole lot of it. A forest is considered to be a carbon sink if it gets more carbon from the atmosphere than it releases. So think about all the trees in your backyard. You can't see it, but they are gathering up so much carbon from the air around you. They're going to store that carbon, and that carbon needs to be stored. We can't have too much carbon in our environment. So the trees pull that in through their leaves. They store that in their leaves and in their roots and in their trunks. They release a little bit of it, but not as much as they actually hold on to. So A carbon sink is a place where all that carbon sinks into. If that forest can grab all of that carbon and absorb it, it's very good. So if we manage our forests in a way that our big existing healthy trees can grow, and if we plant more trees and the right trees and native trees, we can help create a big carbon sink. So here's one of those straight out of your textbook, but I love this image because this one actually is easier to understand. So if you look at, let's start in the top middle, right under the words carbon cycle. So we see that big white circle, it says CO2. And the CO2, that's carbon, and that's everything from animals, including us, breathing out, everything from trees giving off carbon, and especially the big thing, unfortunately, is all of the carbon that comes from our factories and us driving our cars. Well, look where that arrow points to on the left. All of that carbon sinks into our amazing trees. And if you follow that line then through the tree, it goes down into the roots. The carbon is stored in the tree trunk and in our roots. That goes then down into dead organisms and waste products, as well as the fossils and fossil fuel that we then use to make the things in our factories or make the fuel for our cars. So the carbon cycle is actually a carbon circle. And the most important thing in this are the trees that are featured on the left-hand side, because that carbon is going mostly all to our forest systems. Where does that carbon go? Again, here's an even closer look. Now, don't stress your mind out looking at this too deeply. So we have our tree here in front of us. Now, some of the carbon is stored in the leaves, but that's only 1%. In the trunk and branches, though, 40% of all of that carbon is stored in the trunk of the tree and the branches. And then 13% is stored down in the roots. A lot more of the carbon goes down into the soil itself and then ends up being collected and harvested for use in fuel and in factories. But you can see how important it is that these trees hold so much, a high percentage of that carbon itself. All right. So, oh yeah, no, go
Alice and
ahead.
Andrew have a question.
Yes, please.
They wanted to know what is a successional forest?
Ooh, good question. I'm actually going to get to successional forests, and that's one of the big things we're going to talk about today is what does a healthy forest actually look like? So let's get right into that because I'll talk to you about what a successional forest is. Now, this is a fragmented forest. So to first understand what a successional forest is, you have to know what a fragmented forest is. This is a fragmented forest, which means it's a forest that's kind of all alone. As you can see all around it, it's been mowed for either agriculture, like growing corn or growing soybeans. And this piece of woods has been pretty separated from the other forests around it. Now, if we were to completely leave this habitat alone, if man and women were to never touch any of the plants in this picture ever again, all right, so no mowing and no growing corn or anything, no gardening, no farmers' fields, a successional forest would be all the little tiny trees that would start popping up because they weren't getting mowed anymore. It would be all the trees that could grow to be 5 and 6 and 7 feet tall, and then 10 and 20 feet tall. So instead of being flat land going straight to 70-foot trees, there would be all sorts of different heights of trees. There'd be 1-foot tall trees, 5-foot tall trees, 20-foot tall trees, and 80 foot tall trees. But in a habitat like this fragmented forest, which can still harbor a lot of species, so a lot of animals can live there, but not as many as if this was a successional forest. So this is a successional forest. This is very, very, very healthy. Now I'm going to ask, and we'll see if you reply. Do you think, now be real, because I know some of you are really good runners. Can you run as fast as you can through this forest without accidentally getting a stick in your eye? There's no way. You would trip and fall over tree branches, tree trunks. You would have leaves smacking you in the face and tree branches smacking you in the face. That's a good thing. In healthy forests like this, you can see that there's baby trees, saplings, that are only a few inches tall, a few feet tall, maybe 6 feet tall, 10 feet tall. So every layer, everywhere you look in this picture, there are trees. Small trees, medium-sized trees, very big trees that we can't even see the top of. That is a healthy forest, because all those different layers are very important for all of the animals all around us. Ooh, that one's blurry. Does that look blurry on your screen, Kate? Not, yeah, a little bit. Okay, let me go.
There's also another question.
Oh yeah, let's go with that.
Billy wanted to know, how many acres of trees would we need per factory?
Oh, Billy, you stumped me.
It probably depends on the factory.
It does. It would have to depend on where that factory was. Okay, so where in the world is that factory? How big is that factory? What is that factory making? Because they might be using even more fuel. They might be blowing out more smoke, okay, than others. And really, how many forests are nearby, close by, to help offset, that's the word, offset that carbon? So how many forests are nearby to actually be that carbon sink? That's a very good question, Billy, and it definitely does change depending on where you're at. So here's the healthy layers of a successional forest. We have the forest floor, which is the bottom there, where all of our dead logs are and all our wonderful leaves have fallen. The ground layer, which is just above that, so that's where our beautiful spring wildflowers are. That's where our lovely summer wildflowers grow, where our small baby bushes start to grow. And then just above that, the shrub and seedling layer. So the seedlings would be the small trees that are growing up. Then you get to the understory, and then tip top of the trees are the canopy. You want all of these things in a healthy forest. If you have a forest that's only canopy and nothing underneath it, then you do not have a healthy forest. A healthy forest needs all of these layers to stay the right temperature and to support the right animals. Now, this is a pileated woodpecker feeding its nestlings in a big dead tree, a big cavity in a dead tree. Now, pileated woodpeckers could never, ever, ever, ever nest on the ground. They could never, ever, ever nest only 3 feet above the ground or only 5 feet above the ground. Pileated woodpeckers must have trees that are very tall. So it's important to have all of the different layers, all the different heights within a successional forest. This black-capped chickadee sitting in a redbud tree cannot nest on the ground either. So there's no way that it could live in a forest that only had canopy. It needs the ground layer and the shrub and seedling layer and the middle layer as well. So these species are only able to live in our wonderful healthy forest. Now this
Another
is
question.
Oh, yeah, fire away, Kate.
Do different species live in different age successional forests?
Do different? Yes, they do. Good question. So, if you have a young successional forest, so let's say a farmer decided, you know what? I don't want to grow corn in this field. I would like to grow a forest. I would like to have trees living here again. And so let's say he planted a ton of little seeds, a bunch of acorns, and those little seedlings started to pop up and they became 5 feet tall and then 6 and 7 feet tall. Well, other little seedlings might only be 1 or 2 feet tall. That very, very young, that baby forest, it's still so short. All those trees are only like 5 or 6 feet tall at most. There are special birds and special reptiles that will live in that habitat before it becomes an older forest. There are types of birds like field sparrows and yellow-breasted chat, brown thrasher that live in those very, very, very young forests. I mean, they're so young. They're only really a few years old before they become our big, tall forests. Any other questions, Kate? Does anybody know what this lovely animal is right here? So it's a quiz. Kate, you're not allowed to answer. See if anybody knows, what is this animal? It is a salamander, Micah and Ezra. It is a salamander. That is a red-backed salamander. This animal, which if you look at your pointer finger, that's as big as a red-backed salamander gets, as big as your pointer finger. So that is not a big animal at all. They're very long and skinny like a worm with tiny little toes, little beady black eyes, little gummy. Oh, you have a lot of them on your property. That's awesome, Micah and Ezra. This is the most abundant animal in our forests. So that means if you were to walk a mile in a forest, there would be thousands of these in a healthy forest under the leaves, under the fallen logs. This is the most common, the most abundant animal in our healthy eastern forests. They eat all sorts of little animals that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Now, we can't have salamanders without having the different layers in our forest because those layers help to keep the forest floor down at the bottom nice and cool for where the salamander lives. Now, that salamander could never live in a forest like this. This forest has been pretty beat up. This forest doesn't have any shrubs. It doesn't have any, let me see if I have that's a better picture. There we go. This forest only has a few small trees that are growing. It has some grasses, but hardly any shrubs. So down on the forest floor, even though we have the canopy way up high, down on the forest floor, there might not be enough shade. There might not be cool enough in this forest to have salamanders living under the logs. So a forest protects itself when it has all those different layers. It protects itself with a cooler temperature, and all of those wonderful wildflowers can grow. Now, if one of these big tall trees falls down, it'll bring some sunlight in, and maybe some smaller trees will start to grow. But unfortunately, one of the biggest problems in our forests around here today are deer. Now, deer are wonderful. They are adorable, beautiful animals. Look at those big beady eyes and those big ears that they use to listen from a long way away. But we have so many deer here today because we've taken away their natural predators. Deer used to be eaten by wolves. Now, here's a quiz. Do we have any wolves in Ohio today? See if anybody responds. Could take them a second. Do we have wolves in Ohio? Micah and Ezra guessed yes. Anne guessed yes. There are no wolves in Ohio. The gray wolf has been completely taken out of Ohio. They have been hunted and killed off, sadly. There's no wolves. It is so sad, Anne. However, we do have coyote, but coyote are nowhere close to the size of a wolf. A wolf is a very big animal. Coyote are actually quite small. Now, coyote, compared to a lot of dogs, are about the size of a medium to large dog, pet dog. But coyotes do not hunt in packs like wolves. They're a lot less aggressive. In fact, coyotes kind of like to hang out by themselves unless they're raising their pups. And a coyote's favorite meal, believe it or not, is a mouse. Coyotes love to hunt white-footed mice and deer mice. That is their favorite food. Sometimes bunny rabbit, but they love mice. So coyotes are nowhere near as aggressive and as big and tough as wolves. They don't hunt in packs like wolves. So when wolves disappeared from Ohio, the deer started to grow in numbers. When people started to settle all over Ohio, the deer were pushed into the forests that are around us. But with no predators, deer could just have more and more and more babies. So deer became very, very common, and they are everywhere today. Only about 15 to 20 years ago was it actually a big surprise to see a deer as you were driving in the evening or driving in the early morning. I remember going out with my parents about 30 years ago and looking for deer because there were hardly any deer around. There was one place we could go find them. Now, our life has changed so much since then. So, deer actually, unfortunately, eat a lot of our forests today. Now, what you see in this picture might look like a healthy forest. It might. But if you look closely, if you were to walk down this trail towards the back of the photo, you see a very dark line underneath the edge of the trees. All right. So as you walk, let's pretend you're walking down this trail. There's almost a perfect cutoff, dark line up ahead from the ground to where the tree leaves start. That is called a browse line. A browse line, BROWSE. And you can see it in this photo as well. Go back to this one. You can see where just beyond the deer and above where the grass starts, there's a very almost perfect black line where there's no leaves, and then all of a sudden the leaves start again. Deer eat just about everything on the forest floor. So if you look on the left side of the picture, you might have to sit back a little bit from your screen because this one unfortunately is blurry. But if you look on the left side of the picture, what do you see? I'm going to have you answer. What do you see? What plants do you see on the forest floor? Remember the bottom layer on the left side of the picture. Micah and Ezra said none. You are correct. Nothing. Now, the good thing on the left-hand side of the picture is that there are some good trees, and there's a lot of fallen leaves, and those fallen leaves will make excellent homes for insects, and those fallen leaves will eventually turn to dirt. However, that is not a healthy forest at all. The deer have eaten every little baby seedling tree, every little wildflower. They've just consumed it all. Now, on the right-hand side of the picture, you can actually see there's yep, the right side is mayapple, Micah and Ezra. Yeah, it looks like a big umbrella plant. I love that. On the right-hand side is a healthy forest. This fence has been put up as a study to show how deer impact our forests. The fence was put there so that the deer cannot get into that side of the forest. So you can see the difference. The deer can walk all around the left side, but they cannot get into the right side. And look at all of the greenery that is growing. That is a healthy forest system.
Alex
Here's
and
an
Andrew have a
example.
question.
Oh yeah, fire away. What's your question?
They'd like to know if the browse line in the parks has decreased.
Ooh, very good question. Unfortunately, not much. That's a great question. We have been working very, very hard to help protect our forest systems here in Cleveland Metro Park. But there's a lot of deer, a lot of deer. Now we have seen a difference because we do eliminate some of the deer that are here. That food is donated to the food bank. So we are seeing a difference when we do actually start to take some of the deer out. That's a very hard conversation. It's very uncomfortable to have. Because since wolves aren't here anymore, their only predator, the only thing that eats a deer is a human's car on the road. And that's not normal. That's not part of a healthy system. So yes, we are seeing in certain areas where the browse line is healing. More plants are coming back. There are studies that we're doing in some of our forests where we've closed it off from the deer, and all of the young trees are exploding out of the ground because they're not being eaten. So that does make a difference, controlling the deer population. This example is crazy. So if you look at this photo, this is just unbelievable. So the fence has been put here as another study, and actually was left here permanently to protect part of the park that you see on the left-hand side. So they put up the fence, and the deer ate almost everything on the right-hand side. And you can see the difference. Look at the two people standing there, including the park ranger. All right. They're standing there, and there's hardly any young trees. There's hardly any plants that are anywhere near their knees or their waist or their chest or their head. Now look at that silly man hiding on the left-hand side of the fence. He is almost covered completely. And if he were to walk to the left, I bet you couldn't see him at all. That habitat has been protected and allowed to grow. The habitat on the left is a successional forest. There are tons and tons, thousands, probably millions of sapling baby trees, wildflowers that are growing there, grasses, ferns that are now protected from deer and are able to successfully grow up tall to become a healthy successional forest. So that is a really amazing example of the difference that can happen. So this is something that you can actually help with. We learned in school, everybody learned in school, that worms are good. And what's really weird is when you get older, you learn that worms are bad. Now, that confuses a lot of people. So we're going to start back again. All right. Some worms are okay. With all of the big earthworms that we have here around our houses and in our park, those were never supposed to be here. They were brought over in plants, in pots of plants from a bunch of different countries. Europe, some from the Middle East, some from Asia. All of these different types of worms were brought here. Now, you know what? You wouldn't think that a worm could do something bad. Look at that worm. It looks peaceful. However, some of these gigantic worms eat so much of the dead leaves and the roots on the forest floor that they leave the forest almost completely defoliated. And that means no foliage, no leaves on the forest floor. So the top picture shows a ton of wildflowers. I know you don't really see flowers, but this is in the summer, so there's not as many flowers. The top picture is a forest without worms, without those big earthworms. Now, in that top picture, there are teeny tiny little worms, probably the size of your pinky and very thin, but not the huge big earthworms. The picture below is a forest that has both deer and earthworms. Now, we may not find any salamanders in that forest at all. There's no birds that could nest on or near the ground in that forest right there. Chipmunks would have a hard time blending in or hiding. Squirrels don't have much protection down there when they're storing their nuts. So it's very, very, very different looking with those animals here. The way that you can help is by, if you ever go fishing and you're done with your fishing worms, you need to take them home and either use them again by putting them in the fridge or a cooler, take them fishing again soon, or unfortunately, by throwing them out. You cannot release fishing worms into the forest because they are bad and they can multiply very, very quickly. Kate, any questions? I know it's kind of shocking, but there's only a couple different types of worms that are actually good. Most worms are bad, unfortunately. And this is why on the left-hand side of the picture is soil in a forest. And if you look up at the top, you see some little green grasses, okay? And you see a little strip of dark mud on the left-hand side of the photo. You see a little bit of dark mud, but the rest of it is actually clay and sand, and there's hardly any dark mud there left. On the right-hand side, you see tons of beautiful, rich, dark, fertile soil. That is called detritus. It's loamy leaf litter. I love that phrase, loamy leaf litter. See if you can say that 5 times fast. Loamy leaf litter. Now, how do we get detritus and why is it good? Well, when trees lose their leaves in the fall, think about year after year after year, all of those leaves falling to the ground, they start to decompose. They start to turn into soil itself. As time goes by, as it rains, as it freezes, as it rains some more, and as animals start to, and mushrooms start to eat those leaves, they break down into this beautiful, dark, rich, fertile soil, that loamy leaf litter. And it's actually very fluffy, light soil that has a bunch of mushrooms in it and a bunch of dead leaves. It is perfect for trees to grow in. And that's on the right-hand side of the picture. But on the left-hand side of the picture, that is not good for trees to grow in. Now, the bad earthworms actually get into the good soil and then make it look like the soil on the left-hand side. They eat through all of it. There's not enough left to grow those wonderful seedlings. Now look at this. There's not healthy soil to grow the small trees, the perennial grasses and flowers, the shrubs, the young cherry and young pine trees. So we can't have, over time, We can't have young trees growing in a forest that looks like the picture on the left. That soil isn't healthy anymore. Another thing so let's get to some good news. Let's get to some good news. So you can help by telling other people to take their fishing worms away, don't dump them. All right. And when you go fishing, make sure that you store them and keep them cool because we don't want more of those earthworms out there. Now, let's take a look at fungus. Do you have any fungus jokes, Kate? People love to make jokes about mushrooms, like a fun guy because they're called fungi or fungi or fungi. But mushrooms are actually very, very, very important. Now, these aren't the mushrooms that you put on your pizza. These are different types of mushrooms. And these mushrooms grow on the forest floor. These mushrooms break down dying wood and they help turn it into soil. So right at the bottom of the forest, on that lowest layer, the forest floor, these fungus grow. Oops, let me go back to this picture. These fungus grow on the bases of dead trees, on old logs, in the leaf litter itself. And those mushrooms are actually they're breaking down that dead and dying wood, that decaying wood, that ends up turning into beautiful, rich soil. Now, what's incredible about this fungus, we would not have our forests if we did not have these different types of fungus. Now, it's strange to think about. Some people are like, ew, fungus. It's strange, it's weird. It doesn't have beautiful flowers or something like that. Some of them stink a little bit. Some of them are odd shaped. But fungus are super important for our forests. And this is why. So let's start at the word mushroom. So top right, we have the word mushroom. There we've got a couple of mushrooms coming up out of the ground. And those mushrooms are growing out of some soil that has a bunch of dead leaves. So they love those dead leaves. The nutrients that they're getting out of the soil come up through something that looks like roots coming down. So you might not picture a mushroom as having roots, but look at all those stringy roots coming down into the ground. That's called hyphae or mycorrhizae. So again, we got our mushroom and all those roots. They actually look like tree roots, don't they? But they're very, 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 very tiny. Some of them are very hard to see. It can be kind of microscopic. All of those teeny weeny tiny roots are reaching down into that wonderful soil, carrying nutrients. So it's carrying water and different types of food back up to the mushroom, as well as bringing it back up to the roots of a tree. So mushrooms that are living nearby, sorry about that. I swallowed my own spit. Hold on. Kate knows I've been doing this for 16 years and the most ridiculous things happen to me.
It's always nice when you get stabbed by your own body.
Can you believe it? I've been talking so much. Oh, so silly. Sorry, everybody. So we have these wonderful beech tree roots here. Mushrooms will grow in between those roots of the tree. And all of those teeny tiny roots coming down out of the mushroom will actually help the roots of the tree. Since all of these teeny tiny roots are bringing those nutrients, look at the pink arrows, bringing all that food back up to the top layer of soil, it's helping to bring all those nutrients up to the roots of a tree, which is just amazing. Here's a baby tree. This is a view of a teeny, teeny, tiny little baby pine tree. And the oddest thing is that these roots are actually not normal. But this is what roots look like when they've been under the ground for a while in very healthy soil. So these roots right here, if you follow the roots down from this baby pine tree, excuse me, they're bright orange. If you follow all of the other roots, they're a beautiful whitish color. All of those are mushroom roots helping to latch on to the tree roots, bringing that baby tree nutrients, bringing it food, helping to bring in organic matter, water, sugars towards that baby tree's roots. So yes, trees can grow very tall. They can grow very thick and wide. They've got big roots that hold them into the ground. And a tree's roots can pull in tons of water and sugars and store carbon. But all of those fuzzy whitish roots all around that little baby tree, that's all from a mushroom. That's mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae. And that's helping to feed that baby tree. You may have seen this if you've ever bought a potted plant. And you can see some of the actual roots from the plant, but then you wonder, wait a minute, what are all these other roots that are kind of odd and wrapping around themselves in bright white and really thin and tiny? Well, a lot of those are mycorrhizae. It's a type of fungus that grows around and near and within the tree roots and helps to bring it nutrients. Now, we must have, let me go back, hold on, don't get dizzy. We must have rich soil, like the soil on the right, in order to have a healthy mushroom population, in order to have healthy trees growing into that wonderful, dark, loamy, leafy litter. All right, so let me pop back. Hold on, don't get dizzy. I'm going to read this slowly. Just as the microbes in our bodies help our bellies aid in digestion and help us with our immune system, so help keep us healthy, the soil's microorganisms, like this mycorrhizae, digest nutrients and protect plants and trees against sickness. Plants and trees have formed a relationship with fungus. The fungus colonized their roots, so the mycorrhizae, turning them into fungus roots. So that fungus growing on the tree's roots extend the reach of a plant over 100 times. So a tree's deep roots can go into the ground, but then the mycorrhizae from that's growing around their roots goes way deep down into the ground. Those tiny little white fuzzy filaments bring nutrients and water back to the plants and trees. They also connect the trees together and help them communicate with one another to set up defense systems against disease. So here's an example. A study showed that those mycorrhizae, so all those fuzzy white fungus growing around the roots of a tree, act as a signal. They act as a conduit for a signal, helping the plants and trees talk to one another and defending themselves against pests. So in this study, when the trees were attacked by aphids, when this plant was attacked by aphids, it sent a signal through those fuzzy white mycorrhizal filaments to the other plants nearby saying, hey, Here's an early warning system. Produce a chemical because these aphids are here. So these other plants started to produce this chemical that keeps the aphids away and also attracts wasps, which is just amazing. That is absolutely mind-blowing. I'm going to take a pause and see if people are not sleeping and understood that.
And we do have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One, I think you just answered, are there any relationships between fungi and living trees? I think you've been covering that. The other one, what type of forest do black bears and bobcats like? And then there was another bobcat question. Well, not really a question, a comment. There was a bobcat spotted in Ohio and they eat deer. So a little bit about.
Oh, good questions. Good questions. All right. So let me go back to, yes, those fungus, those mycorrhizae, live within the roots of trees and plants, help to protect them and bring them food, which is so important for our forests. So when we say, how do forests work? We've looked at already some of the layers of a forest, what animals can actually have a bad effect on a forest, how a forest should look, and then also how something as incredible as mushrooms help to talk to the roots of trees and plants in our forest to help keep them safe. Okay, it's bear and bobcat time. Black bear and bobcat like very, very deep, thick forests. They are actually animals that don't want to be seen. Now, they will walk through fields. They love to go along the edges of a forest where there's a lot of blackberry shrubs and raspberry shrubs. And they also can find food like mice and mushrooms and the roots of trees. This is black bear I'm talking about now. Black bear loved to eat berries. Her favorite food is eggs from birds and blueberries. And so they can find those both in a forest, but also on the edge of a forest. So right where there's a thick, brushy field growing, a young successional forest. Bobcat, on the other hand, like big, deep forests. All right. They love mixed pine and maple and beech forests that have big fallen logs for them to jump up on and look around in. Bobcats like to eat small animals, small mammals, and birds. I love bobcat. Let's talk about bobcats and bear all day. Those are so awesome. All right, so let's get into this. That's actually perfect timing because we're ending with talking about just how important the soil is for all of our animals. So let's look over on the right-hand side where you see the picture of the bird and the animal. All right. And then picture a bobcat and a black bear over there too. Everything starts with those plants. Everything starts with the roots and the soil, the healthy soil with the plants. And then the fungus and the bacteria and all the teeny weeny little tiny nematodes, the little worms and the little spiders and beetles help to feed all of the animals so that we can even have bear and bobcat. All of these remarkable animals, which some of you might be like, ew, that's gross. But we need all of these animals, beetles, woodlouse, which are also called roly-polies, springtails, slugs, snails, beetles, centipedes, even little spiders. All of these little insects and arthropods and arachnids, all of these animals feed the bigger animals. All these animals help break down all of the wonderful leaves, just like the mushrooms, to make our forests healthy so that we can have beautiful, beautiful, big patches of Virginia bluebells, huge rolling forests full of white trillium, so that we can even have very rare special species like pink lady slipper. These grow in only our healthiest of forests, with the best soil, the most wonderful soil, so that we can have special frogs like this wood frog that blends in with all the leaf litter. So we can have uncommon and rare big salamanders like this spotted salamander that only live in our healthiest forests. So we can have chipmunks, because who doesn't want more chipmunks? Filling those pouches full of nuts. So we can have special birds like the brown creeper that only nests on the side of shagbark hickory trees and oak trees where the bark has been flaking off. They must live in healthy forests where the hickory seeds can drop and grow. So we can have special birds like hooded warblers. Hooded warblers only nest in forests where there are layers. They can't nest in a forest where there's a bunch of deer and earthworms because they can't nest at the top of a tree. They don't know how to do that, and they cannot learn. They specialize in nesting in little shrubs down by the forest floor, down at the base of the forest. So, and oh yeah, I forgot, the turkey was the last animal. How could I forget about turkey? Oh my goodness. You have to have tall grasses and shrubs in a forest so that turkey can lay its eggs on the ground and raise all of its young. Look at those little gobblers. So our forests must have, our healthy forests work beautifully together in a pattern where mycorrhizae and mushrooms help that soil. There's certain animals that we actually don't want more of, and there's certain animals we do want more of. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening to this introduction to how do our forests work. Please, by all means, ask any questions that you have, or even write in the chat any suggested programs that you would like me to do. I thank you so much, and I wish I could see your faces. Hopefully you end up getting out to a hike sometime soon. Oh, thank you, Anne. I saw that. Thank you so much for coming. All right, Kate, it's all you.
All right, guys, thank you so much. We're going to say goodbye to JB and go ahead and stop recording, and we hope we see you around real soon.